Hey guys, my name's Aaron Massey. In today's video, I'm going to show you how to make this DIY sliding barn door from scratch. Before we get started on this build, I want to talk about the main components that make up the door. For the door portion of this build, we're going to break things down into four major components. There's the vertical pieces, also called stiles. Next, there's the horizontal components, which are also called rails. Then there are two diagonal pieces. Lastly, there's the inner paneling of the door. I chose to make this out of 3/4 inch tongue and groove common pine. There's two sections, one for the top and one for the bottom. Together, these dimensions make up a 36-inch door. If you're making a door of a different size, you'll need to adjust your dimensions to fit. To get started, I rip each 2x6 on the table saw to make sure that each one is exactly 5.5 inches wide. Next, I took the pieces to the chop saw and cut them to length. Next, I change my table saw blade over to my dado stack, and I carve a 1 inch deep by 3/4 inch wide channel down the center of my vertical pieces. From there, I move on to the horizontal rails. I set my blade height to 3/8 inches and make multiple passes on the table saw to give me the 1 inch tongue that fits in the 1 inch deep by 3/4 inch wide groove that I just carved in the vertical pieces. I measure the diagonals of the door just to make sure that it's square before putting in the middle rail. Once I know the door is square, I measure and mark the center of each stile. I then go ahead and mark the center of the 2x6 that makes up the center rail. When I glue all these pieces together later, I'll line up these marks and I know that the center of the rail matches the center of the door. I set my blade depth back to the 1 inch and I carve the 3/4 inch by 1 inch deep dado down each piece. The top and bottom piece each only get one cut, while the center piece gets cut on both sides. What I'm doing is creating a channel for the door paneling to sit in all the way around the door frame. From here, I do another measurement just to double check that everything remains square before I go ahead and cut the paneling that fits inside. Both the top and the bottom panel should be exactly the same. So I take my tongue and groove paneling, I go ahead and cut 12 pieces 35 inches long. I assemble each tongue and groove piece together as I go to create one solid component. I disassemble everything and get it ready for glue up. I'm using some saran wrap to wrap around the pieces of wood that are holding the door up so that the door doesn't stick to the wood pieces that are holding it up. Starting at the bottom of the door, I start to apply plenty of wood glue to each piece and then start to attach it and build it as I go. The overall width of the panel is 27 inches long, so you need to rip a little bit off of the last piece so that it fits into the channel properly. From there, I lock in the bottom panel by applying plenty of wood glue to the center rail. I use the marks that I put on the stiles in the rail earlier to make sure that it's in the right place. I'll then clamp up the bottom before moving on to the top. Make sure to use a couple pieces of scrap wood so that you don't leave clamp marks on your door. Once the bottom section is in place, I move on to the top section, repeating the same process, making sure that it's square as I go, and gluing everything in place. Once you've got the final piece of the panel in, it's just a matter of attaching the top rail, gluing it in place, and then moving on to the diagonal pieces which make up the finishing touch of the door. For the diagonals, I laid out a common 3/8 inch piece of pine, marked the center point on each end and on the door corners themselves, and then scribed the angles so that each piece fits snugly in place on each end. Once each piece was cut, I applied plenty of wood glue and then used some weight to hold it down against the door until the wood glue set. I let the glue set up overnight before going back and hitting it with a combination of an orbital sander and a belt sander. I focused my sanding on the outer frame of the door because I wanted the inner paneling to keep the rough texture. After the door was all sanded, I started laying out the hardware for the door. Before we get started on this part of the build, let's take a look at the components that are going to make up the hardware and the track. The track assembly is going to be made up of 5 main components. There's a 75-inch long 1x4 common pine backing board. The spacers to extend the track from the wall are made of 1¼ inch dowel, and the track and support brackets that hold the wheels are made of 2-inch flat bar steel I got from Home Depot. I cap the ends of the track off with 2-inch angled steel and hold everything together with 4-inch lag bolts. The wheels I'm using are 4 inches in diameter, and I found them at a local hardware store for about $12 a piece. To get started, I cut 2 pieces of the flat bar steel to make the brackets that hold the wheels to the door. Next, I'll take them over to the drill press and drill the holes for the carriage bolts. From there, I line up the brackets and mark the holes before coming through and drilling them out with a Forstner bit. I pay careful attention so that the tip of the bit only comes out the other side. Then I come back through and drill out the rest of it from the other side so that I don't have any tear out. I use washers on both the front and the back of the carriage bolts before I tighten them down. Next, I use another carriage bolt and some washers to attach the wheel to the bracket. I follow the same process with the other bracket, and then the door portion of the build is complete. From there, I move on to the track assembly. My track itself will be 72 inches long, so I come in and measure 1.5 inches from each end. Next, I start on the end that'll attach above the door, and I lay out marks every 16 inches where the backing plate will attach to the studs. I then measure and cut 2-inch sections of dowel that'll act as spacers to take the track away from the wall. Using the drill press, I drill a 1/4 inch hole down the center of each spacer. Next, I lay everything out and I mark and drill the recesses that'll hold the dowel spacers. I use a depth stop on the drill press so that I can drill a 1/4 inch recess into the backing plate. Then I use the drill press to drill 1/4 inch corresponding holes in the track itself for the lag bolts to pass through. To create the stops that hold the door in place from falling off the track, I'm cutting 2 2-inch pieces of angled steel that I can bolt onto the ends of the track when I assemble it. Once I deburr them with the belt sander, I take them over to the drill press and drill a hole for the lag bolts. I make sure the holes line up, and then I bring everything inside and I dry fit it in place in the bedroom. I use some 3-inch decking screws to attach the backing plate to the wall at each stud. From there, I attach the track using some 4-inch lag bolts. The lag bolts go through the pre-drilled holes and attach to the studs. Once the track's in place, I dry fit the door and make sure that it works. Once the dry fit is complete, I disassemble everything and paint all the pieces. I chose to paint the door white because it goes with my design plan. Then I use some black spray paint to paint all the hardware. Once everything was painted, I reassembled everything, put the door in place, and put the stops on the end of the track. Lastly, I added a few finishing touches. I used a standard door stop to act as a guide for the door, and I finished the door off with a decorative handle. Once everything was in place, I checked the motion of the door to make sure everything was good, and that was it. That's how you build a DIY barn door from scratch. If you liked this video, please be sure to hit the like button. Also, be sure to subscribe if you haven't already. And if you want to support Mr. Fix-It, please visit my Patreon page. I'll put a link in the description below. As always, thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll see you next time. Hey guys, today we are building a DIY concrete vanity top for the master bathroom. I went ahead to save some time. I've done a bunch of work already, and I just want to talk about what I've done so far.